I'm here with Jay Van Bavel. Jay, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Let's start by just having you introduce yourself. Just say a little bit about what your title is and what you work on.
Yeah, I'm a professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University, and I am the director of the Center for Conflict and Cooperation, where we study all the factors that make humans get along and where that goes wrong. So we study that using the big thing we've been studying lately is social media and technology like artificial intelligence and how that fuels conflict and polarization and maybe other ways it can be used in a healthy form to give people a voice and allow people to find what they have in common with one another.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. I know you have kind of an interesting story about how you got into social psychology in the first place. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a tiny town in northern Alberta and called Fox Creek, and I was the first generation kid to come to college from my family and graduate. And then I did my PhD at University of Toronto. And I think the things that really drew me to studying group dynamics, one was I was always fascinated by sports and how quickly people could come into conflict with one another. And I remember having playing pickup hockey games or football games as a kid. And I'd have my best friend Jaron. And if we ended up on the same team, it was great. If we ended up on opposite teams, we'd be screaming at each other by the end of the game. So that was kind of my first exposure to what are called minimal groups, where you just flip a coin and it causes discrimination. And then the other thing is, after I graduated with my psychology degree, I worked for a summer with this anti-racism organization where I went into high schools in social studies classes and talked to grade 10 kids about racist and sexist stereotypes. And it was something really fascinating to me where they would have some false belief, a stereotype, and then you'd explain to them why it was untrue. And then it wouldn't change their mind at all. They'd just come up with another reason to explain why they didn't like a group. And I started to realize a lot of this wasn't based on their what they said their beliefs were. It was on something deeper. And that motivated me to kind of look under the hood in my PhD and study things like implicit bias and social neuroscience to try to understand why do people have animosity to groups and what's driving that, and then what we could do to kind of help them see the humanity of people who are different than them.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea. That is a very vivid picture of you just being best friends with your friend when you're on the same team, and then absolutely hating each other when you're on the different team.
We were both super. Our birthdays were 2 days apart. We were both super. We love sports, but we were both really competitive, and we'd be throttling one another by the end of the pickup football game.
I definitely have been in similar situations, mostly in high school. I think I grew out of it a little bit, but yeah, I definitely feel that. So you have this book, The Power of Us, which is great, by the way, which I have on my desk. Product placement. Dun, dun, dun.
Yay!
And in the book, you say that groups are central to who we are. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that. Say a little bit about sort of how you think about the power of groups and what are the sort of main conclusions you reached in writing that book.
Yeah, the first thing is we contain multitudes, to quote the famous poet Walt Whitman, which is people in America, we think of ourselves as individualists, but in reality, we contain all kinds of identities. I'm a father. Right now, I'm talking to you as a professor or maybe an author. I guess we're talking about my book. When I'm done here, I have to go teach a class. So I have a different mode there. My wife just popped into my office a few minutes ago, so we're talking about different things. And throughout a day, you go through all these different identities, get activated by who you're interacting with and what your role is. And they change how you think about the world. And when I'm thinking about the contents of my book and talking about it, I talk in a different way and I'm focused on different issues. And when I'm home and my kids are trying to figure out what they want for dinner with me, and I'm not thinking about work or science at all in that moment. And this is really all of us. All of us contain a lot of different identities that get triggered in different situations. And so we need to move beyond this notion of individualism. However, I will say this is one of my favorite studies, and we write about this in our book. Even individualism is a group identity. So it turns out that, America's the most individualistic country in the world. But it turns out when immigrants come here, the more they start to identify as American with the group, the more individualistic they become. And so it turns out individualism is also an expression of a group identity. And so group identities can make us have all kinds of weird counterintuitive belief systems and ways of thinking and acting. Another one that is another one of my favorites is we think of groups as causing discrimination and conflict. You identify the group, that means you'll dislike or hate other groups. But the research on this also shows that if you identify with a group that is very open-minded or egalitarian, the more you identify with it, the less discriminatory you'll become towards outgroup members, and the more willing you'll to be open to them and engage and cooperate with them. So it's not just the groups that we identify with. Once you identify with it, you try to figure out what are the norms, and then you want to be a good group member. And so you try to live up to those norms, and that can lead you to be individualistic or conformist. That can lead you to be discriminatory or egalitarian. It really just depends on the norms of the group that you identify with.
Yeah, I think there's something so powerful about that idea, and it actually goes back to something that I've always thought about when it comes to psychology. I think that people often think about psychologists as studying where the individual or the person is the target of our investigation, but the key insight here, and I think that you're pointing out, is that we're not studying the individual. We're actually studying the way that the world appears to the individual and how that world changes depending on the different group identities that they are occupying. So I think a powerful word here is a word that a colleague of both of ours, Jakob Trope, talks a lot about, which is the idea of construal. Construal is this idea of how we interpret the world, how we understand, and the way that the world seems to us in a given moment. And it sounds like what you're suggesting is that from moment to moment, depending on the particular identity that we're occupying and the way that the bonds that we feel like we're a part of in that time, the world appears or gets construed in a different way.
Yeah, I love that notion. I think it's one of the most powerful ideas from psychology. And in psychology, a big part of that construal is social psychology, is whether you're thinking about yourself as an I or an us, maybe if you're in a relationship, or a we, which is even more inclusive. And the we's can be ranged from a group of, say, 3 of us, all the way up to hundreds of millions of people, if you think about your national identity or even your identification with all of humanity. And that has profound effects on what we value and how we act. And the group identities are really interesting because people will sacrifice their life for a group that they care about. I mean, this is what happens during wars. So I think that is a really powerful motivating force in human life. And if you're just thinking about yourself as an individual, you're going to misunderstand all these things. Why are people sacrificing themselves in war rather than everybody should just defect and avoid the draft or avoid volunteering if there's ever a war, because that's the pure self-interest. But the radical alternative is reality, which is most people don't do that. Most people actually step up and try to defend their country. And that's I don't know, a lot of things like that make a lot more sense once you understand group psychology.
Yeah. I'm also thinking right now, I mean, particularly with respect to the sort of the intense levels of self-sacrifice, this idea of collective effervescence, or this idea that we're sort of losing our own sense of identity and sort of subsuming it into the larger whole. And I think that, you can, I guess there's a lot of research in some of the work that you've done is just the ways in which we can kind of lose ourselves and become almost entirely identified with the group that we belong to.
Yeah. This is, and it varies, right? There's some groups we don't identify with that much, and there's other groups we identify with a lot. So even when I study students at New York University, where I teach, some students are not identified with all at the university. They're not going to wear a sweatshirt that says NYU or have a mug or a backpack with a logo on it. They just come here for their classes. So the class over, they leave. They don't care about the community at all. There's other people who really deeply identify with the place, and they really embrace being a community member, volunteering, meeting other students. They dress up in all the paraphernalia. They become really good alumni and donate to the university after. And so it's really in the university's interest to create a good sense of shared identity. And I will say that some colleges are amazing at this. I did my postdoc at Ohio State University, and when they have a football game on campus, it was one of the most amazing things to me. 110,000 people descend on the campus to watch the game, all dressed in scarlet and gray. They have this huge kind of festival, tailgating party with even more people. And then they're doing chants, they're cheering, they're high-fiving strangers. And it is this really incredible community building experience. And the alumni are very connected to the college and the team for years after, and volunteer and donate money to them. And so that's something that's really fascinating to watch psychologically.
Yeah, I remember going to Vani, my wife, as you know her, her graduation, or like what was it? Not a graduation, but like a homecoming event, and they had this amazing ritual where all the oldest class members line up in a parade, and they sort of process past the youngest ones, and then the youngest ones in a line process past the oldest ones. So you get an opportunity to see the entire like span of generations that goes from, you know, people who graduated, you know, 80 years ago or whatever, all the way to the people who are graduating right now. And it's just like this amazing sense of solidarity, and really creates that sense of community. And I remember being like, oh man, I wish my college had done that, because it was like, like it really makes you feel connected to the community when you get those rituals that create that sense of solidarity.
And
oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that scales, like when I started running a lab at NYU, you were there in the early days of the lab. I didn't really think a lot about creating a lab identity. And then over time, I started like, you know, we made sure we had like a cool lab logo and website. And then we started getting swag and cups and mugs and umbrellas. And it was all of, yeah. And then we have like now conferences where we all get together with all the alumni every year or two. And so part of it is really building a sustained, deeper identity with the community that people really feel that they carry with them even once they're gone. And so that the thing is, this can scale to universities, but it can also scale down to, you know, a team of 10 or 20 or 30 people at work. The same principles apply. Then they can scale up to countries.
Totally. All right, let's change tacks for a second. I want to talk to you a little bit about your work on social media, because I know that's been kind of one of your main areas of focus over the past few years. So let's start with the Funhouse mirror idea, which I think is an amazingly good phrase to describe what's going on in social media. So you've used the word Funhouse mirror to describe what's going on social media and how it changes our perception of each other. Can you explain what you mean by this term and what implications it has for society today?
Okay, so let's start with the context. Here's my phone. It is 6 inches high, roughly. The average person now who's on social media scrolls through about 600 pages of this each day. So that's the height of the Statue of Liberty. That's how much information we're consuming from our social media news feeds. That's your brain food, right? That's your information diet. And by the way, that scales to 5.5 billion people around the world. They're scrolling through online 600 or 300 feet of news feed a day for the rest of their lives. Young people are scrolling through about twice as much as that. And so that's, by the way, 5.7 years of your life is going to be consuming social media.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve Jobs.
Yeah. And so what are you consuming? So, you know, the way that social media is often described is like a town hall where everybody gets a voice. It's democratizing, right? And after the Arab Spring, when like platforms like Twitter help people organize and protest authoritarian rulers, we thought this was going to be a force for good. And then like the senior executives from Facebook often talk about social media, like Facebook and Instagram and so forth, like a mirror. If there's good and bad things on there, it's because it's putting a mirror to society. So we've been studying the social effects of social media, what you're consuming for the last decade. And what we're finding is it's not a mirror, or if it is a mirror, it's a Funhouse mirror where it's distorting what reality is in pretty severe ways. And so what we have a new paper we're working on. This is with Will Schultz and Claire Robertson, a former student of mine. And we have tons and tons of data showing that the people who are posting online are just at the extremes. People don't want to post if they have ambivalent or complex or neutral or nuanced views. And the people who are extreme are like overly confident, hyper-moralized, passionate about an issue. And so they post about it like nonstop. And so when you're scrolling through that 300 feet of newsfeed a day, what you tend to see is not a representative sample of users, let alone humanity. It's not like an opinion poll of 200 random people across the country. It is only from the extremes. And so you're seeing a really distorted view of posts that are way more extreme, way more outrage, way more hostile than the average person on the street. And that can lead you to have false beliefs about what the norms and values are of the country, of your own community. They can lead to false stereotypes. So if you disagree with somebody, and you see the type of people you disagree with from the other political party posting online, you might think, oh my goodness, those people are way crazier than I thought. But it turns out it's just because you're seeing the tiny sliver of the most far extreme people from that group posting. You're not seeing the average person in that group post. So that creates stereotypes. And this is not just politics. Like, you can see this in like sports fans communities or fandom cultures of like celebrities or singers like Kendrick Lamar and Drake, or Beyonce and Taylor Swift. And so this is the dynamic of social media, and it really is causing us to have a distorted view of all kinds of issues, political issues, of our political opponents, of humanity in general. They seem just way more hostile than they actually are.
I love that. It meshes really well with some of the work that we did at More in Common on the exhausted majority, with this idea that you just have people who are more in the ideological center and are just like way less likely to share their political views on social media, to get their political content from social media, or to just want to get into an argument. They just are like a little bit more likely to sit out the conversation, and they might just be a little more flexible in their beliefs, or maybe they're sort of mixed or nuanced. Maybe they believe one thing on one issue and another thing on another issue, and so they're not the ones that are voicing these extreme opinions. So yeah, it totally makes sense. I love the way that you are expanding this to these other topics like celebrity culture or sports or something like that. I think that's fascinating because it suggests that this is a more ubiquitous feature of the platforms themselves and these intergroup dynamics, rather than anything particular about politics per se.
Yeah. And by the way, we find this for people who are ideologically extreme. People on the far right and far left post the most. But when you get to any given issue, you find that it's by the extreme people on that issue. So like on the issue of marijuana, it's the people at the extremes, and they aren't necessarily left and right in the same way as they are on other issues. And in fact, the issue-based extremism is even stronger than general ideological extremism. And so it's just extreme people on any issue are doing this. And let me give you a sense of this. Like on Twitter, there was a survey. 10% of people are posting 97% of the content about social media on social media. So 10% of people are driving almost everything you see about politics. And they're probably 10% are probably driving everything you see about like sports debates. It's just the hardcore people in that space. And those people tend to be like status seeking. They're doing it to get status, and they tend to be really hostile. And so it creates like a not fun place if you're, and that's why the exhausted majority, even though they're the majority of people, they disappear. They're hidden. You don't see them online. It's as if they don't exist. If you're just going online and looking for how are people feeling about this current political issue or trending news story, you're not going to see the vast majority of people because they just disappear. They retreat from the platform, or they bite their tongue. And so it's really a bad place to go if you want to get put your finger to the wind and see, or the temperature of the water or whatever on a given issue. You're just not going to get an accurate perception. Okay, so now let me layer on one other thing. 3 more facts. Okay, so who are you seeing? Who are these 10%? Well, I will say 0.1% of people share 80% of the misinformation. So most of the people sharing propaganda, conspiracies, misinformation, tiny sliver of people doing it. And when we're designing interventions, we need to be thinking about that 0.1%, because if we're trying to intervene on the other 99.9%, it's not going to have much effect. Okay, in Reddit communities, it's like 3% of communities cause 33% of the hostile content. So it's a tiny sliver, 3%, causing a huge amount of the conflict. So you see this with all kinds of dimensions of badness. It's a tiny sliver of people are producing most of the stuff that the rest of us find really awful about these platforms and about the internet, and make us want to retreat. They make us want to log out or roll our eyes or disengage. And so it's like we need to think about, like, how are we going to create platforms that make it comfortable and safe for other people to have a voice, right? It's not a democracy if like only the most hostile people are dominating the conversation, because then everybody doesn't feel, they have free speech, but if they're not feeling comfortable because they're going to be harassed, what kind of speech is that?
Yeah, it's like there's a good word in there, like an exocracy, a rule by the extreme, or something like that. I
Yeah,
bet there's a
yeah.
good rule.
That's
There's a
you
good
got to
word in
like
there.
find some way to coin that, because that's what it is. It's a good way of thinking about it. It's we think of like oligarchy, right? The rule
Yeah,
by the
exactly.
really rich.
Yeah,
By the way, this is all operating within oligarchy where Elon Musk owns his platform and
yeah,
Zuckerberg owns three other platforms. But within that, they create a system that allows the extremes to dominate and bully people and
yep.
push propaganda and misinformation and all these other things.
Yeah, totally. So when I give talks on these kinds of issues like the exhausted majority and perception gaps, how we misperceive each other, I often get questions like, "So what's the fix? Like, what do we need to, how do we revise or fix our social media environments in order to kind of address these problems?" I'm curious. I'm sure you've gotten similar questions. What are your sort of go-to responses or ideas about how to address this?
Well, I'll say the first most basic one is touch
Yeah.
grass.
Uh huh.
Another thing is try to engage with people or learn or experience people engaging in healthier ways. So I saw this great post, which was like, whenever I see debates on social media, I just I hate the people more. But whenever I hear those exact people talking on a podcast, I like them more. And so it's like when we collapse debates to these like very two-dimensional, aggressive discourses, we find that really off-putting. But when we hear people in nuanced conversations like this, even when they disagree, we're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I disagree with that person, but they have maybe a good point, or at least I can see where they're coming from. And so that's one of the reasons why I think like the growth of these types of conversations is like really blowing up, because
Yeah.
it allows people to, it's a more three-dimensional portrait of somebody's belief systems in a
Yep.
respectful environment. And so we need to move conversations in public forums. I actually wish universities, I said this a few years ago, I was at this small conference. It was with the president of a university, and he gets up and all these experts in the room, and he says he was at this conference with university presidents. And he says, I was just come from this conference with university presidents. This was like 9 years ago. And he said, their biggest fear is like Richard Spencer comes to campus. Student group invites him. You have to host him, even though he's like a neo-Nazi. And then it just causes chaos. And then you're in the news as like either suppressing free speech or letting hatred go. And the advice I came up with in that meeting was, universities are so scared of this happening, but the reason student groups are inviting people like Richard Spencer is because they don't feel like they have space to actually debate things. So I said, what the university should do is lean into the debates, host a bunch of debates on big issues where there's different perspectives, and they will go and enjoy those, and they'll feel like you're not hiding from debate, but at least you can curate it so it's not people who are totally extreme, and it's people who can kind of like give steelman versions of different arguments, and also role model respectful debate. Like, this is something we should be teaching students, how to have respectful debate, not just here's an extremist and then the only answer the students can come up with is deplatforming them. Like, have debates and defend
Yeah.
their right to debate things and say we're a university. And I will say this, my favorite email I saw this was the new president of Stanford, Jenny Martinez. She's like a human rights lawyer. She was at the law school and they had canceled some speaker, and she wrote a letter to all the law students about like, if you're going to be a lawyer, you have to learn how to like listen to people who are different than you, and get comfortable disagreeing with them and build the skill of disagreement. And then she became president. She got promoted when their other president got caught in plagiarism scandal. And so she became president, and she sent this email to all the undergrads like a week before they arrived. I think it was this year or last year. And she said, listen, prepare to be uncomfortable. That's what college is fundamentally about. If you're going to come to Stanford, you are going to be challenged nonstop. And it was just like, as I said before, it's not just what you identify with as a group, but what are the norms of the group. And when you're the leader, you have really a lot of power to set the norms. And so she was basically saying, you're going to come to Stanford, get ready to have your mind stretched in some uncomfortable ways and be challenged. We're not going to like hide every disagreement from you. We're going to expose you to it and get you thinking. And we're not going to tell you what to think, but you better be here to engage with people at different perspectives and be challenged by it and embrace that. And if you want that, this is the right place. And I can think of no better university for that than our like top universities like Stanford. That should be like their DNA. And I'm not just talking about political debates. I'm talking about like challenge the scientific conventions, the biggest philosophical debates throughout history. All of these things should be, that's where universities, when I was growing up, that's what universities were for. I remember like sitting around with my roommates till 2 a.m. and we were 19 years old debating stuff that we'd heard in our classes, and it was fun. And we hadn't heard that stuff from the small town that we were from, because it was also politically homogenous in an opposite way. And I just I loved that about university. It was so engaging and interesting. And I think universities, we should be at the front edge of reclaiming that, not the front edge of hiding from debate.
Yeah. Do you feel like that culture has changed? I mean, it does seem as though, from my distant perspective on this, that the sort of default approach of students towards universities is to sort of not necessarily have to deal with views that contradict their beliefs.
Yeah, I think universities have slid more and more in that direction. Yeah. And then I think it backfired on them during after October 7th, because they had gone so far in the direction of creating a safe space, which is the opposite of what safe space actually means in the organizational literature. Safe space, from Amy Edmondson's research, means that high-performing groups and institutions are ones that allow disagreement and are comfortable having disagreement and respect people who disagree and challenge the status quo. Universities had gone in this weird opposite direction, a lot of them, where they were carving out spaces where no one could disagree with one another, and overreacting when they did. And then, of course, October 7th happened, and all of a sudden the universities didn't know what to do. They're like, are we going to allow these criticisms of that Jewish students find anti-Semitic, or are we going to say that this is a safe space and you're not allowed to say those things? And so they were really tied up in knots. And then that really was problematic. You saw university president after university president getting fired, left, right, and center. And some are still really not recovered, and they haven't figured out what their value system is. Or they advertised all their history of activism like a Columbia on their website, and then all of a sudden the students came and occupied those same buildings and they did not like it anymore. So it's well, you admitted all those students because they were activists, and you brag about your history of your students taking over these admin buildings, and now you find it really objectionable. Pick what your value system is.
Right.
Yeah, and in some sense, I don't even care what their value system is. Each university, imagine a world, we have free markets. Imagine a world where each university just picks a value. We're going to be the debate place. We're going to be the place that doesn't debate anything, and you can come and no one will challenge you. But figure out what you stand for, advertise that, and then stand behind it. Have some integrity to it, whatever it is. And then students will opt into the colleges. And I would like to see that marketplace of colleges if they actually figure out. But first, they have to figure out what they value.
Yeah, that's tricky too. Okay, so I know we're coming up on. We have only a few minutes left. I want to know what are you working on right now, Jay? What research that you're working on right now that you haven't published yet are you most excited about?
Okay, I've hinted at the Funhouse Mirror paper we're about to submit. Let me tell you the other thing that all my people in my lab are excited about is AI. So we've done social media and recommendation algorithms, but hundreds of millions of people are now using AI. And so we have 2 new papers, they have not been published yet, on how is AI going to play into intergroup conflict and extremism. So it turns out it depends on how you use it. So we have one project where it turns out people actually think AI is more neutral than humans. And I actually think that's, we always talk about, there's all this discourse about AI being biased. AI being biased. And to an extent, AI is not perfect. But people see it as more neutral than humans, partly because they realize humans are humans are super biased. And so AI might be a little bit better than humans. So they prefer actually to learn from AI about politics, and even about non-political issues than they do from partisans. They don't trust people on the left and right. They would actually rather AI give them advice. And so it can maybe reduce partisan bias, because now it's a source that's walking around on your phone in your pocket that you can go to, that you don't have to ask a person or see what the discourse is on social media. You can ask AI. So that's how people are using it. And we have a new study with the New York mayoral election, which was hot political news. And we created a chatbot where we fed in political platforms, and people could talk to the AI and learn about what each candidate stood for, and actually get rid of all the filters of all the propaganda and pundits and media. And it was accurate, because we just fed in what and it made it on something substantive, not their personalities or who's charismatic or whatever, but what it actually planned to put through. So that's a positive use case for AI. So we're trying to scale that and test in other elections. Okay, now here's the downside of AI. This is a different project. And it turns out one of the big features of AI, a lot of platforms are they're very sycophantic. Okay, they tell you how great you are. I don't know if you've played with it, but
Like
yeah,
they're just telling me the truth, right?
yeah, they're
just
telling.
telling
Well,
me the accurate.
okay, so this is what we tested.
Daniel,
So
what an amazing idea! Oh, I'm so glad you thought of that. Wow.
yeah, yeah. So
I'm like,
so
I want to spend more time with you.
so you just summed up our findings across like 3 big studies. First of all, people prefer the sycophantic AI over one that's neutral or disagreeable, and
Yeah.
they see it as unbiased, just like you said. They're like, oh, that's the truth teller, the one that
Yeah,
tells me how brilliant I
absolutely.
am and how right
Totally.
my political beliefs are.
Yeah.
And they don't like the one that disagrees with them,
Finally,
even
someone who gets it.
yeah, someone who gets it finally. And so the problem is that these companies are incentivized to keep the AI sycophantic. Even
Yeah.
though, and what we find is if you use it and you use a sycophantic one, it makes you more extreme. So it's actually growing extremism, and it makes you more overconfident because it tells you how bright you are. And it
Mm.
makes you feel better than average in your beliefs. You know, the classic better than average effect. And
Mm-hmm.
then you also have what's called the bias blind spot, that you don't see the bias in it when it's sycophantic. And then you want to engage more with a similar sycophantic AI in the future. So this is the problem: is these companies are going to get rewarded by
Yep.
users who want to engage with that. And I will tell you, I'll end on a positive note. I just always like to end a podcast on a positive note. There is an exception. On average, people want the sycophantic AI and it has those bad effects, but some people don't. And turns out it's people who score high in intellectual humility actually prefer the disagreeable one. And I
Oh,
will,
that's
yeah,
good.
and I will say that when I went through all the different chatbots when I was like trying out the study. I actually preferred the disagreeable because I wanted to hear what my blind spots were. I think like
Yeah.
most scientists, I think would prefer that. Is if you went into science, hopefully you enjoy alternative perspectives.
Right.
So now we're trying to figure out how do you make people more open-minded and foster intellectual humility so they'll engage with these technologies that give them facts that challenge or round out their perspective on something.
Oh, I love that. That's really good, and it does offer a sort of a way out because I asked my chatbots to stop being so complimentary, and it did it for like a couple hours,
Yeah.
and then like slowly slipped back into
Yeah,
to
because it
that
knows
sort
what
of
you want.
ingratiating.
It's
It
it's
does. It
it's
really does.
trained.
Yes, I know. It knows me too well. Um,
It knows
Jay,
what
can
you
we?
really deep down love.
I know. It knows me really too well. Um, Jay, thank you so much for chatting with me. This is wonderful, and I know that we could go for another hour and a half
Yeah.
if we had the time. But I'm gonna let you go. As a closing question, what is who's another person that you think that I could talk to move this conversation forward?
I mean, there's so many good people. I would say in the science space, Mina Chikara, who studies intergroup
Mm,
relations, is one of my favorite researchers and collaborators.
yeah, yep, love
If you
Mina.
want to learn about the sycophantic chatbots, ask Steve Rathje. He's a postdoc of mine, and he's going to be at Carnegie Mellon next year doing all this stuff on tech and psychology. So he'll be able to tell you what the future of that looks like. So that may be 2 people that have on your radar. And I know you know both
Love
of
it.
them. So
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a while since I've spoken to Mina, and I've been following Steve and all of his fantastic his work and some of the talks he's been giving. And y'all will appear at Andrew Yang's podcast. He went to Aspen, and I was like, that's awesome. So happy for you guys. Okay, Jay, well, I will let you go. Thanks again for speaking with me, and
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
I'll talk to you again soon.